Okay, everybody. Okay, here we are with the video lecture for week number 9. Uh, I'm going to do things a little bit different. What I'm trying to do this week is, as much as possible, uh, tie up loose ends or fill in gaps or provide additional material about things we've discussed. I'm going, as far as my video lecture goes, I'm going to sort of put off to the side the topic of regression analysis, which is listed as a topic. I know we've talked about regression analysis. And what I have attached for this week are two uh, videos, YouTube videos of lectures from other people. They have a lot better graphics than I didn't have any graphics. I mean, they have good graphics, they have good explanations, and it's more of the technical stuff. I tried to introduce the regression analysis topic as sort of understanding the concept, but these two lectures talk about the actual statistical aspects of it. So I want you to watch those two, and I'm also including articles on regression analysis. I want you to read them. I want you to watch the video and come prepared to the class on Thursday with questions. Because I really think this is a good opportunity to understand sort of the next aspect of regression analysis. Just I've been focusing a lot on talking about how what it is and what you're looking for. Um, these videos will address a lot more of how to do it. Now, both videos, there's a lot of overlap. Now, neither one of them are that long. I think 15 minutes or, so each one of them total will be a half hour. Now, this lecture will be shorter, so it won't take um, a whole lot more of your time. But I really want you to watch them and read the video and really come away from this with a good understanding of regression analysis. Um, Okay. Now, as far as tying up the loose ends, what I mean is I want to go back through some of the material that's been covered in your book that we haven't. Um, Sometimes what we talk about in classes sort of coincide with the book, and sometimes the stuff in the book has been separate. Um, and last week we talked about single subject after uh, carry on with talking about uh, different other stuff that had been in the video lecture. And today I did want to talk about mixed method. Now, in this class, I've stayed away from qualitative, of course, because this is not advanced. There is advanced qualitative research course, but that is not what this is. Um, and so, mixed measure, um, mixed method research is one that combines quantitative and qualitative um, research approaches. So I want to, uh, and the way it is, typically the way it is approached is um, you gather statistical data from your sample, um, and then you use that to sort of direct what sort of qualitative data you collect. Now, I think it has an intriguing possibility. I know that both of you have studies that would best be described as quantitative, and I think that's preferable. I will be honest. I don't have a strong preference for mixed method. I've had so many students, dissertation students, research students express an interest in it that I think it's a topic worth giving time to. I honestly don't like it that much, only because quantitative is difficult enough, qualitative is difficult enough. When you try mixing the two, it can just be, it just seems to bring in more problems than should be necessary. But a lot of people like it. It is interesting, so I think it's worth spending some time on. Okay, so you've got quantitative. Quantitative is a way of collecting data, numerical research data that can then be converted into usable statistics. And the purpose of quantitative research is using measurable data to formulate facts and uncover patterns in your research data. Qualitative is used to gain a deeper understanding of the subject. Um, it helps to develop ideas or hypotheses. It's used to uncover trends and thoughts and opinions. Um, just to sort of build on that, I want to go back to what I talked about in the single subject research, where I talked about the difference between single subjects and case study. And if you consider that single subject is quantitative and case study is qualitative, you can see where this distinction comes. I even talked about with the case study. Um, and remember what they have in common is both of them have only one subject. With case study, you can even see it. I mean, case study, you build on your treatment. You talk about the treatment, you talk about what was done for the individual, um, go through specifics, and then talk about how it worked out. And you could see how, with a case study, it's so flexible in terms of what you're just talking about practically what you did. And there's such a lot of flexibility there that you can start to see how you could say, well, based on what this case study showed, maybe it is worthy, maybe it would be useful to further study this phenomenon, to further study what the approach used in the case study showed. So if I found that in, the case study that I did, one particular type of approach seemed to really help, then I could go to a more quantitative um, research and say, and study it in a quantitative research way. One thing to really keep in mind about quantitative and qualitative is quantitative is set up the way, because it follows a scientific method. It uses numerical data. It's objective statistics. So there's mathematical processes there, which are considered to be more objective. So much of it is set up on how subjects are identified, keeping keeping the subjects balanced in terms of being reflective of the population, using objective methods. So many steps are taken to keep those things in place that it really only is with quantitative research that you can comfortably generalize your results. That you can say, we took steps to make sure that what we found here can then be um, generalized to the population. Qualitative just does, it doesn't mean that qualitative can't be generalized. It just means you can't be as comfortable as you are with quantitative about generalizing your results to the population. So typically the approach is one where qualitative, and for those of you who took intro to qualitative and quantitative research, you may remember this, that uh, sort of the approach is you use the qualitative to sort of generate the hypothesis, to generate the theories, and then you use quantitative to to test the theories. And qualitative isn't seen as a way that you can really test it. Now, since there's that process of qualitative is where you get the theory and quantitative is how you test it, sometimes researchers basically don't want to wait. They combine the two. So that's one of the reasons that you get mixed method. So mixed method is a procedure for collecting, analyzing, and combining quantitative and qualitative research results as a way of understanding a research problem. Um, and the idea is that if you do it both ways, you further understand a research problem, you further understand the answer to the research question than you would um, with only one method. Um, so okay, so moving on from there. Um, so what you would do is you would take. So how does mixed method actually work? So you take the quantitative data, which could be the result of instruments, the result of checklists, anything with numerical data, and then the qualitative data could be case study, interviews, observations, um, and you combine them away that you can analyze both. So what you do is uh, you have to provide a rationale for the design. You have to show what the purpose would be of doing uh, both methods. So one of the reasons, we talk about mixed method in the intro to quantitative and qualitative. We touch on that. So I wanted to try to use this. This is advanced um, quantitative research, and I guess I can say that I wanted to talk about mixed method because I wanted to address this issue of rationale. I wanted to really look at, we've spent, this will be the ninth week that we've talked about all these different approaches to quantitative research. And so the question then becomes, when is there a rationale for doing both? Because, like I said, I don't particularly like it. I don't particularly like mixed method. I think it brings on more problems than it's worth much of the time, but not all of the time. So, what do you do when you have a mixed method? Well, you use it when one type of research is not enough to explain or to answer the question, and you can see from what we talked about throughout this course where that might be. Because quantitative data requires um, bringing everything down to numbers. Sometimes numbers just don't answer the question. Sometimes there's not enough to tell you about the individual experiences of the person. And to really understand that, you need the individual experiences. Um, and that so um, when one type of research is not enough to explain or answer the question, another is when you need qualitative to help explain what you got in your quantitative findings. Um, the other is when you want to provide an alternative perspective to what you had in the study. And to be honest, the other one is sometimes you just have both sets of data. Um, trying to think of a good example would be I don't have any to quote you, but some of the research that has been done, some of the more formal quantitative research that's been done on the TAT, and particularly the Rorschach. Um, you know, a lot of times the Rorschach research has been based on interviews where they ask the person, they interview the person, they give them the test, and they have them to give the results, and then um, they quantify it by, the person with a Rorschach mixed method. Rorschach research would be one that would particularly fit in a mixed method. And since I know both of you are at least familiar with the Rorschach because I know we, I was teaching the class that it was covered in. The Rorschach would be that research has been particularly good for mixed method, but and I would have more specific studies to give you as far as which Rorschach that was mixed method. But just as a way of example, if you think about it, if you think about the TAT, let's talk about the TAT. There's been less quantitative research done on the TAT. But if the quantitative research that has been done follows the same sort of approach that quantitative research on the Rorschach has followed. And what I mean by it is you both know what the TAT is. So you both know, you've seen it. You give this um you give this thing, and you wind up with what is basically an interview. You have the person, they've given you the responses to 10, 15, 20 cards about what they see, why they see it, what they think is happening, what they think happens next. Now, you might have, um, in order to um, quantify, what you might quantify is sort of what answers the person gives to the question, what do you see here? If in that second picture, the one with the girl on the farm, if they identify how everybody interacts, that might be a one. And if they identify only how two people interact, that might be a two. You would identify specific aspects of the person's responses and give that a number, and that's how you quantify it. So you would do that, but in the end, what you would also wind up with is this lengthy interview that's only been used to identify patterns. But you may then want to go back and say, what more can we get from these responses? Because we've got this vast amount of interview data that the person has given us. Let's go back and analyze it to see if it can tell us more about what we can find out from the TAT. So you might find someone who's doing a TAT research using quantitative data where they maybe use a scoring method for evaluating the results, evaluating the responses from the person. But then they go back and delve deeper into what more they could tell about the subjects based on the lengthy responses that they gave. So that's an example of a mixed method approach. Uh, I don't know of a study that's actually done that, but that's just an example. You figure if you use a scoring method on the TAT, you're going to get some good information, but it's going to be limited. Some of you both did the TAT results paper. Some of those were 20 pages long, as far as interpretation. So if all you're doing is scoring the TAT, you're going to get some data, but you're probably going to want to go back and delve a little bit more into, well, what else can we do with these results, with these answers? Okay, so like I talked about, the purpose of a mixed method design is really when you think that using both will help build on the answer that you have to your research question. I want to talk about the different types of mixed method design. There is the convergent parallel design. So, one way you could take it is you collect both qualitative and quantitative data at the same time, and you sort of analyze them together. So, you analyze the um, the um, you analyze the numerical data, while at the same time um, collect. So you might have example might be you might have uh, a a like let's just say the Beck depression inventory. You may have the Beck depression inventory, and then afterwards ask the person to participate in an interview. So you might have or you might have them fill out. We haven't talked about qualitative data is usually interviews, but it can be written or typed. So you may have the person then fill out interview questions afterwards. And so about their depression, about their experience with depression, or you may, or um, probably a more direct way of mixing qualitative and quantitative is um, you interview the person and you complete the Beck depression inventory. And then afterwards, you start interviewing them based on their answers. So you basically ask for some additional information to help clarify their answers, to help build on their answers. So you would have the numerical data and then collecting the interview data afterwards. Another method of mixed method is what is called the explanatory sequential design. And what that does is you first um, collect the quantitative data, and then you go back and you collect qualitative data to help clarify what you found in the quantitative data. Now, very often that would involve uh, a different population. That's one of the more complex ones because very often what it would be is you can't always go, once you collect the quantitative and analyze it, you can't always find the same people to participate in the qualitative research. So you may have to use two different groups of people. You may need to collect quantitative data, figure out what the quantitative data says about your population, and then go back and collect qualitative data. Or it may go the other way. You may collect qualitative data and then go back and have them fill out questions. It's weird. Very often the way we talk about it is qualitative is how you develop the theory, and then quantitative is how you test the theory. So usually qualitative comes first. But when you're doing both together, very often the quantitative would come first because the quantitative would lead you to decide what questions to ask and how to conduct the interviews based on the results that you obtained. Um, there's the embedded design where you maybe collect qualitative data and then maybe sort of in the midst of um, like for instance you may be asking the person um, you may be interviewing people and finding out just about their life. Let's say you're doing a qualitative study and you want to, or you're starting out with qualitative research and you want to find, and you're doing qualitative research on the phenomenon of people who live by themselves up in the woods. You may do that as a qualitative interview study, but in the midst of it, you may provide some sort of depression inventory as a way of measuring the degree to which depression may or not play a role in their life. Um, and then another one, um, then the other ones, and I'm looking at my notes. The other ones, I'm not even going to their names. Basically, there's a lot of more. Those are the main combinations of mixed method. You either you start with qualitative or quantitative, and then you may use the other one to um, add to what you get, or you may use it to build on the answer. You may use it to add while you're collecting the data. You may use it to expand on what you could take from the one method, and then, or you may use it to clarify one section of what you're studying. And those are the different steps that you take with the mixed method design. And, and then the last part of this lecture, what I wanted to do is I don't like to do this, but I'm going to go directly from the book. I don't like to take time repeating something from the book when you've already read the book. But I wanted to point this out because there's of course a lot of material in the book, but I wanted to start on page 507 and just go through the examples they give of three quantitative approaches to counseling process research, and that is at the heart of what I'm hoping you have gotten from reading this book and even from thinking about um, how you can use quantitative research in the future. Because what they're talking about here is using quantitative research design to answer the question, what makes therapy work? They call it counseling here, but you understand what makes therapy work? And that is probably one of the more important um, uh, um, research questions in all of clinical psychology. What makes it work? Of course, in abnormal psychology and in psychology in general, why do people have problems? Even in healthcare research, um, what sort of approaches help? But counseling process research really gets to the heart of clinical psychology, which is in psychotherapy, what helps people get better? And so I wanted to go through the example that they gave and just make sure you were recognized because, in all this material, certain things get lost and it's not always clear what stands out as the most important. So the first one is the experimental counseling process design. And that's where they take the researchers named Janet. Um, so she defined counselor self disclosure as the dependent variable. Um, she found a quantitative measure of psychological functioning. Um, uh, and I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Counselor self disclosure. The researcher was studying uh, counselor verbal behavior and wanted to see to what role um, self disclosure from a counselor impacted on the client's psychological functioning. So what she does next is so notice what she did. She identified the dependent variable and the independent variable, and the dependent variable, she had a measure for it, and the independent variable, the self-disclosure, she defined that. She got 4 master's level counseling and did some training with them. And then she had 2 coders determine whether they were self-disclosing. Then she randomly assigns 40 clients to one of 2 conditions. One of the conditions was the counselors use self-disclosure. The other condition is they do not. Um, they weren't self-disclosing at all. So it was a pretty clear-cut distinction between self-disclosure and not self-disclosure. Collected the data, then did an ANOVA with the psychological functioning score at the being the dependent variable, and the which group as far as disclosure or not disclosure being the independent variable. Now the correlational counseling process is the next one. Um, what you would do in a correlation is you would simply correlate the different factors associated with the therapist is doing, um, and then collect data about how the clients are responding. And then what you would do is correlate those variables and see which ones are most related to each other. Now, it's a pretty simple, straightforward process, and I'll leave it up to you. I don't want to go and waste your time with going into the details of what the book covers in the chapter because there's a lot of different complexities that are fascinating to read about when you do uh, correlational research in process design. One of them that they bring up is the assumption with correlation is that the observation from one subject doesn't affect the observation of the other, but if you're collecting data from like not one counselor or one patient, but if you're collecting data based on um, several patients from one counselor, which might be the case because a lot of times you'd only be able to collect that data if you're doing it in some sort of research facility where clients have given permission to let different data about them be collected while they're undergoing therapy. And so the assumption with with correlations and almost any sort of quantitative with correlations is that the data collected from one subject doesn't impact the data collected from another. But you don't know that's the case with counseling. You know, you see 5 clients in a day. You don't know that your approach at 10 a.m. may not impact the approach that you have at 11 or 1 or whatever. So there may be some influence. So they're not completely separate. You could read on it, but I just wanted to talk about that's another way that therapy processing can be studied. And where I wanted to end with this was to really point out, you know, I talked about time series before, and I talked about how, you know, it's rather complex and it's not used that much in psychology, but where it is used, it's used pretty heavily. Counseling processing research is definitely one of them because there is um, a lot of research that can be very helpful about um, counseling by using time series analysis. Because if you think about it, counseling, effective therapy is largely about timing. You know, I mean, when do you do certain things? Not is self disclosure ever appropriate, but when is it appropriate? Um, how you know what events during the therapy process tend to help with the therapeutic alliance the most. One research question that you know gets sort of addressed a lot is in the research on counseling on therapy effectiveness. There's a lot of research to show that people make the most gains at the beginning of therapy. They still make gains, but the most drastic ones often tend to be in the first couple sessions. And there's a lot of questions about, well, what can we do? What can we learn about those first couple sessions so as to maybe keep the progress going? You know, keep it at a high level throughout the therapy. So there's a lot of questions that time series analysis uses. It's interesting from a practical point of view. Um, there's a as you know, I live near Pittsburgh, and there's a Pittsburgh Psychoanalytic Institute where they teach Freudian psychoanalysis. You know, people come in several times a week. It's the that school, and they have a research program, and their research is just almost entirely time series analysis, like figure out what the therapist is doing and when they should do it. So there's sort of these strategies that all psychoanalysts have used since the time of Freud. The question since then has not really been what do you do, but when do you do it? When is the best time to give an interpretation? You know, the old theory with psychoanalysis used to be that you never give an interpretation until just before the client's you try to get the client to give it themselves. Actually, you don't give an interpretation. That's the standard school. But even if you do, it's usually only when the client is just there, like real close. You just need to kind of help them piece everything together. One of the reasons that was criticized a lot um, in psychoanalytic, you know, when psychoanalysis was criticized was that takes a long time. That can take years. You know, the psychoanalysis does take years. Uh, Traditional psychoanalysis can go on for years. So, you know, there's a lot of questions of can we shorten this process? You know, it's interesting that you know therapy has been around for over 100 years, and one question that isn't definitive is how long should therapy take? Psychoanalysts say years. There's books out there about how to make therapy effective if it's only one session. Most therapists recognize that a lot of times it's not up to them when therapy ends. It'll be up to the client because the client will just stop coming. Um, you know, or the insurance co- or you know the insurance company. The insurance company will just stop paying. Actually, that ends up being another. That actually would be if you listen to what the insurance companies say, they'll say, well, that's actually the client deciding because what happens when insurance companies stop paying is they'll say, you can keep going to therapy. We're just not going to be the ones to pay for it. You can pay for it. And then usually clients will drop off at that point. So if they're, I mean, people pay privately, but usually they'll drop off if they're used to the insurance paying for it. So, you know, I wanted to point that out because I think knowing about counseling process or psychotherapy process research is a really important thinking to sort of, as we come to the end here, to think about how all this can apply to making your role as clinical psychologists even better. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to include those videos on regression analysis. I'm going to have articles on regression analysis. Please look those over because I'd really like to make sure you leave class, when we meet again for class session number 9, that you really understand regression analysis as much as possible. Okay, I'll see you on Thursday.